You've introduced a safety culture maturity oversight and assessment tool, electronic tool, which has helped a great deal in terms of people at department level being able to assess health and safety culture, but in particular being able to have to validate it. And you've introduced a programme for 1,125 managers, which started in June, in terms of everyday safety management. And I think you're getting towards 10% of managers now being trained on that course. You've also established a strategic health and safety board, which is critical to managing health and safety on an ongoing basis. And of course, you've got formal reporting to this committee here. There's also been a safety net digital system set up, covering management system performance, accident reporting, risk assessment. Again, not only providing a great deal of assistance to managers, but also very effective monitoring of health and safety performance, which in this scale of organisation is particularly important. And there's a clear programme now of a minimum standard of training for health and safety staff, regular programmes of meetings to make sure their actions are coordinated and current risks are understood. And this is particularly important for the high risk areas of the business. And of course, you do have areas of the business which have inherently higher risks. The programme of training or getting people qualified in those areas of the business is not yet complete. And I would say that's something that you need to progress as a matter of urgency, because having people with the right understanding and training to advise on health and safety is clearly critical. So in conclusion, great deal of progress made, significant amount of resources being committed to achieving that, and I think this committee has been instrumental in making sure that has happened. And whilst a large amount of resource has been committed, I think you need to look carefully at the resource going forward to maintain the standards. I'm not suggesting that you need the same level of resource, but certainly the planned resourcing going forward is not sufficient to either consolidate or improve on that progress. So that's something I would leave as a final recommendation. And the two final recommendations in the report was one about the training of those local health and safety staff, and secondly that one. And the danger is that without that happening, you will tend to have a regression. You will tend to go back to a position where you've got more significant risks in your operations. So that's really all I had to say, and I'm open, Chair, to any questions if you wish to ask me.
Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate that. Very excellent presentation. So I'm going to open it up to members. So we see James Tunbridge.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure how to take, obviously, as an opening remark, but I had a question on page 14 in paragraph 6. The subheading is governance and culture, and I completely agree that governance and culture both really matter. But the conclusion of that paragraph is that we're on track with our cultural goals. Does that mean we're not on track with our governance goals? And in particular, Chair, the thing that I'd asked in previous meetings that relate to this overall is that health and safety is incredibly important, and most of which comes here. But there's also an element that goes to audit and risk. And there's also issues with health and safety that we've touched on occasionally, where it's on our, what I'm going to call our estate, our controlled buildings, but not necessarily an event or something run by us. And therefore, the governance piece, I think, is quite important so that we keep the right oversight. And that's why this caught my eye, Chair. So I wondered, what is the state of play on governance? Thank you.
Yes, if you can answer, or Greg.
No, you go first, and I can drop in on specific.
So there was no intention in my report in implying the governance wasn't correct. I think you've made a great deal of progress on that, and you've got a good governance system in place. What I meant was that there was a need to keep advancing the cultural element, because there's a journey there, effectively.
Greg, would you like to come back?
So yes, I would say from my perspective, the governance angle, of course, you've got the regular rhythm of reporting to this committee now. You've got the Strategic Health and Safety Board, which is evolving, and indeed we had a meeting on Monday of this week, which was very productive and is allowing us to really focus efforts in certain areas. So particularly fire safety is going to be a real next area of focus for us, and we intend to do a similar review to the Quadriga piece, specifically focusing on fire. So that will be the next piece to come and bother you all with in due course.
To your question.
It is an answer, Chair.
Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. There's two key recommendations: to pursue training for health and safety where there are any gaps, and also that a sort of a flag saying that we need resources. I would have found it helpful if I were told those two recommendations, how they would be met and when they were going to be met.
It's very clear in paragraph 11 on page 15, this is picking up Sandra's point, that by not resourcing this, those gains can be reversed. So I do think it's extremely important that we understand the budget commitments.
Okay, Greg, is this one you can answer?
So, I mean, part of the challenge here is with respect to the kind of the role of the corporate health and safety teams, the second line defence function, and then the role of individual departments in managing their own local health and safety frontline defence functions. And of course, each department needs to look at its own budgetary considerations to make sure it's prioritising accordingly within that. Now, obviously, the review has just sort of come to a conclusion, and you'll have seen in previous update reports, various departments have different approaches or plans for getting in place the right level of skills, training, qualified professionals and so on. So the Environment Department, for instance, is embarking on a programme of NEBOSH accreditation for its health and safety professionals, which commences in the autumn. So they have different plans of doing it in different ways, and they will need to go through at a local level to identify where there are resourcing gaps, because there are going to need to be decisions. This is an extremely timely opportunity to look down the Chamberlain's way. I mean, once departments are able to weave through all that and work out where the gaps might be, we can have those constructive conversations about where do we need to plug in extra resource. Is it centrally? Is it more sort of locally? I mean, by way of example, things like the everyday safety management training has been funded centrally, so we've been able to put that in place for other departments. But of course, lots of these things they're one-hit things. They need to be embedded by departments as part of their ongoing BAU to maintain that. So the kind of the role for us now is keeping on top of that, making sure they're doing that properly, and that we're supporting them in being able to do that.
Thank you very much, Greg.
If it's also helpful, just in relation to Mr. Tunbridge's question, I did forget to mention, of course, you have corporate health and safety in terms of the corporate risk register, and the Chief Officer's Risk Management Group does also meet regularly and monitor things in that sense. So that gives you an extra governance control.
Sandra, you want to come back?
I'm concerned that we may have an exposure to breach of statutory requirements that could get lost from the perspective of me and maybe the whole committee, because the conclusion talks about a close down review, and I would have thought that we ought to have some assurance, whether it's this committee or audit and risk or another committee, but somewhere the organisation needs assurance that we're not going to fall into breach of our statutory requirements, nor indeed of our highly desirable other requirements to meet health and safety rules.
So you have, I mean, Ian, you might want to add something to this potentially, and David, please do jump in if you want to, but we have the Safe 365 assurance mechanism, which is now embedded in its reporting through service areas into committee, which effectively through that colour-coded dashboard thing demonstrates where areas are at compliance levels above or below and so on, and allows you to track that on an ongoing basis, so you can see where intervention is specifically required in more granular detail, or where things are progressing in the right direction. I can pull out the latest statistics and have to share them with you after the committee, but there were, in the last update report, you had the 6 specific areas of concern which are having more focused intervention and updates. So those will be tracked through relevant service committees, particularly, as well as escalated here, to make sure that the progress that we expect is being delivered, and that you as members can hold office to account for that delivery.
Chamberlain.
Just to add from a chief officer point of view, we have an update to SLT, our senior leadership team, and I have to say it was a fantastically good news story when we looked at the analysis you're talking about, Greg, compared to where we were and where we'd come from and the level of risk that the organisation was taking. So I think let's not take defeat out of the jaws of victory. There's been an awful lot of really good work in there. Of course, we had a long way to go. So clearly we're at that benchmark. But yeah, just to reassure members that senior leaders' eyes are on this. Yeah, thank you.
Was very impressive in the timescale involved.
Philip.
Sorry, back again. On the bottom of page 14, we have a goal of 65%. I just wondered how we reached 65. I would have hoped it might have been higher, but I probably don't understand why we got 65 as a starting point.
Rather than going to the depth now, it's probably useful if I reshare with the committee or with Chief Commoner-elect the previous reports to the committee around the Safe 365 module and how the scoring is aggregated from there, which really 65% demonstrates the distinction between sort of what we would classify as our expectations in terms of moving towards proactive handling of health and safety as opposed to sort of reactive and sort of scraping by a bare minimum. There's a lot more granularity to it than that, so I don't want to overplay it, but there is a lot more detail in the reports, and you'll see it in the coloured dashboard reporting as well. So if I pull out the reports from the last committees and share them with you, that might be useful.
Thank you. Town clerk.
Thank you. That brings us on to item number 5, which is the draft Equity, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Framework. It's a report for information coming to Corporate Services Committee on pages 17 to 36 of your pack, and we have Sarah Ferrer in attendance with us today to introduce the item and respond to any questions.
Indeed. So I'm going to say that we'll take the report as read, and I will open this up to questions from members. James.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful to the Town Clerk basically answering my first question, because looking at this, you get on the agenda item that this is an informational paper. The paper itself is marked for decision, and the summary and information does look like it was decision making. It's got specific recommendations, and I did want to clarify whether we were taking any element of these decisions. Right, in that case, I'll move on to a broader question then, Chairman. The summary on page 17 explains that this is drawing together a number of different important areas of work: the the equity, equality, diversity and inclusion strategy framework. But it also says that the political priorities, and that's partly where I wondered how this works with these informational papers as to how we're drawing in what are the political priorities, because obviously you've got the Policy and Resources Committee and its sub specifically works in this area. I think it would be good to understand, where does the political priority come from? Because unlike a party politically controlled organisation, there's lots of different views, and I just want to make sure they're all picked up, and I'm not quite sure how that happens. And my last point on this is that I don't know whether this is just old habits, but on page 19, in paragraph 3, it refers to the EDI subcommittee. At a very recent Policy and Resources Committee, the names of things were changed, and so I just wanted to make sure we know who's drawing policy input from where. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Sarah, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Apologies. I think this comes from my function being quite new and not fully understanding all the niceties of the different committees. So the paper originally went to the EEDI subcommittee, and we wanted to share it with the Corporate Services Committee because clearly your role in HR policy and activity is crucial. We should have adapted the paper more or made that much clearer, and that won't happen again. The political priorities were set by the EEDI subcommittee, which only changed its name in about two weeks ago, which is why it still refers to EDI in the paper. And there in early 2024, they set a broad set of political priorities around stabilising, very similar to the health and safety journey you've just heard about, stabilising, strengthening, moving to sustaining, and then moving to SOAR. And that was shorthand for those 4 political priorities set by the committee.
Thank you very much. James, does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions from members? David.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one on the maturity matrix on page 32, there's one of the criteria is city corporation workforce engagement. I'm looking at the right one. Apologies. City worker corporate engagement. I just wondered what our aspirations were on that particular heading. I mean, it starts off with the static disengaged business community and finishes up with sort of world class, excellent awareness and high engagement. And I just wondered what our aspirations were to try and achieve that, because that's obviously something outside of the corporations.
Sarah, would you like to come back on that one?
So our plan is to work department by department to identify which parts of the maturity matrix are relevant to them, and then assess the departments and their external stakeholders, therefore the city workers, according to the matrix. So I can't answer a specific what's our aspiration at the moment, because we will do that by engaging and evaluating. Mark Gettleston, who runs the City Belonging Project, has been doing a huge amount and probably is more qualified to answer that directly right now.
Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, I've got a couple of points, I think. I mean, firstly, I suppose, how will we know when anything's different? So I think a lot of the things, and you say it's a draft, so I understand that, but are we going to be putting some measurable targets in at some point? And I suppose the other thing is, how are we going to make sure that this is not another example of silo work in the corporation? How do we know that it will impact on the culture overall? And I think we should also recognise the town clerk's email to members yesterday about where we now are in the social mobility index, and it was good of him to praise members who have raised the issue of social mobility in the corporation in his email. But I just suppose I'm just so interested in, given where we are with social mobility, whether we could at some point in the near future have another report about our success come to this committee, so we could talk about what we've done and what more we can do in the future. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And so I think we've got Adam and then Sandra.
It's just a question about the subcommittee. The subcommittee has met, we assume approved this document. Has it approved it with any comment or anything else that we should be aware of?
Sandra.
On page 28, there's a definition of a city corporation's population, and the next column along, understanding of the population served by the city corporation. Well, who are we talking about? Are we talking about businesses that work in the city? Are we talking about residents? Just residents that live within the City of London, or those who we're landlord for? Are we talking about other stakeholders?
Thank you. So if you can come back on those questions.
Thank you. Taking them in order, how will we know? That's precisely why we're trying to do this theory of change with identified outcomes, which will allow us to see what we are aiming for. And as we develop and implement this, we will identify measures. I'm reluctant to say targets, because that can mean something very specific, and there's a lot to be examined, and clearly it'll be in the hands of members whether we set targets, but identifying the measures of success will be a key part of it. And the more detailed papers, which I'm very happy to share with the committee, do go into that in more detail, but because it hasn't been finished, we didn't want to kind of bring that to you right now. And in terms of the silo working, clearly it's something that we all have to work together on. But the fact that my function sits in the corporate strategy area, and therefore is a function that that is not in a particular place, but is for the whole corporation, is already a move towards that. And what I can say about the first year that I've been here, so I didn't really introduce myself. I'm the Equalities Director. The city appointed me this time last year. We have already built up connected and collaborative working relationships that I think can truly be said haven't happened before. This framework has been developed in collaboration with the practitioners at the Barbican, Guildhall School of Music and Drama and City Bridge Foundation, because they have dedicated EEDI teams there. Over the last month, we've been working and we've already got 50-60% coverage of every leadership team across the corporation, as well as our staff networks and trade unions. So I believe we're working in a different way, and the function is set up to cover the whole corporation rather than a single part of it. At the EDI subcommittee, they did approve it in principle, and what we had discussed was the engagement plan, and their feedback was to make sure that we did engage and stress test it throughout the organisation, which is what we've been doing since the end of September. We will go back to the EDI subcommittee with an update in November, with the aim of finalising this in February. But we're not doing any activity until then. There's already work streams and activity that are being undertaken, so that when we finalise the strategy and the measures, we will already have made a step forward. And then in terms of the Social Mobility Employer Index, thank you for recognising that. And we are very happy to bring an update report if that's what the committee would like.
Thank you. Sandra, would you like to come back?
Sorry, my question wasn't answered. Yes, I was asking. It says here that about the definition of the city corporation's population, and I was asking which populations are we looking at? Are we looking at businesses, residents, who?
Yeah, so part of what we will do is break all that down. So the answer is we're looking at all of them, but not all in the same way. That as we work with each department and area, we will identify who their key internal and external communities are, and then be able to tailor our activity rather than doing a kind of broad brush or one size fits all. So depending on the context, it will be the workers, it will be the residents. And I think part of what we have to do as a city is determine some of those answers. Who is our population? So if we, for example, if we decide we want to be representative in our staff body and leadership, we need to decide representative of what. And I don't have that answer for you today, because that's a conversation we need to have as an organisation.
Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to, firstly, thank you so much for the paper. I was very fortunate to be at the EEDI subcommittee where the paper first came, and I know we had a lot of good discussion on that, and particularly thanks to Mark as well for all the outreach that he's doing. And it was just to respond to Sandra's point in terms of, I think, you know, we had some good discussions on that, and in terms about that inclusivity, in terms of particularly starting to think about actually not just our colleagues, but actually, if you're thinking back to Destination City, are we an inclusive place for people to come and feel safe? So I think that's part of that ongoing discussion that I think we'll want to take forward at the next in November, which I think is the 20th of November.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That brings us on to item number 6, revenue outturn 2024 to 2025. It's a report of the Chamberlain for information on pages 37 to 44 of your pack. And we have Mark Jarvis in attendance to introduce the item and respond to any questions.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, this report is for your information and shows a net overall overspend on all risks of £1.4 million. I won't go through the detail of all the variances. They're in the report, but I will say that it's important to note that a number of the underlying service pressures identified in this outturn report for the last financial year have now been addressed in the current year's budget. So 1.4 million of additional funds were allocated in the 2025-26 estimates, and that should provide a more reasonable baseline budget position for the cost of these services going forward. Happy to take any comments or questions.
Any questions from the committee? Sandra.
So just to make sure I understand this properly, the original budget was 9.7 million. it was agreed at some point during the year to put it up to 12.6. And the outturn is 14. So it's a 30% overspend on the original budget. I just wondered, who approves the spending over budget? How is that managed? And where did the money come from? I mean, was it taken for other people's budgets, environment, or is there some contingency that's been used, or what?
Yeah, Mark, you want to answer?
I can just say that if you look at Appendix 1, you'll see how the original budget movement to the final budget, that's a 9.688 to the 12.640, a movement of 2.952. You can see all the variations there as to how those movements were approved and where the month fundings came from. I'll hand over to the Chamber.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I think in looking at that appendix, you'll see there are some themes in there, which are the pay awards, which are approved by members. So those costs go through. You'll also see environments. Those are between budget heads. Those are agreed between the chief officers. A lot of this was the disaggregation of the town clerk's department and building separate departments up following the TOM. And to be honest, there were still quite a few gremlins in that as we needed to sort out where budgets really should sit. As far as your wider question to who on earth pays and how is this managed? So the budget monitoring is managed at officer level by the senior leadership team. It's also managed by the chief officers within their own individual leadership teams, and of course by the service committees themselves. As far as where did this money come from, some of it would have been recognised as being project costs, but the overall members, you'll be aware that there has been a bit of a theme in the last year of overspending in some departments. That is being covered by effectively as doing a lot better than we had expected on the interest in our cash balances and our investments, which is what has really been the saving grace for City Fund and City's estate in that. Of course, that we could say is fortuitous, and therefore that the underpinning budget monitoring becomes absolutely imperative. And that's something that Finance Committee scrutinises on a quarterly basis, and we'll be considering it at their next meeting in November.
Thank you, Chamberlain. So we've got Woodhouse, and I'll come in with a question.
Thanks, Chair. Caroline, I get your answer. My concern is that it's very clear in the paragraph about the controller and city solicitor that a lot of these costs relate to specific projects. Why are they not being charged to the London Museum, Salisbury Square, Barbican, Smithfield, etc., and not being highlighted here as a charge? Because as far as I'm concerned, if there are project costs, which I think is what you just said, they should be lumped into Salisbury Square, etc.
So thank you, Chair. It's a very good question, and in my initial response, I was alluding to some of these costs going through that needed to be charged elsewhere. That is absolutely one of them. So I'll defer to Mark and Sonia on the detail of where these are happening, but the change in the budget for this year of putting the increased budget is to reflect things like that. More generally, is getting the budget into the right place or where the costs are going to be incurred. But I don't know if Mark or Sonia had any further detail on that.
No, I think there is a question about, whether budgets are being properly allocated for some of those big projects to take into account city solicitors' time. We do have uplifts for a number of their areas of costs, but in external consultants and things like that. But mainly the uplift is around HR and the people officer costs.
You want to come back in?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I think it would be really helpful when we do the review of these major projects that we highlight charges that might have been in a grey area, because really to understand what they've actually cost the corporation, we won't get a true figure. So it would be very easy to have it as an appendix saying there were nearly 1 million, sorry, it's more 9.35 of controller costs, of which 50% was Salisbury Square or 50% was the markets. please.
I think, Chair, it's very helpful, particularly in terms of estimating in future for those projects, is ensuring that all costs are captured, which I suspect as we go through, we'll find that there wasn't enough allowance made for legal costs. Certainly, that's been my experience to date, and there hasn't been enough allowed for finance, which I know Sonia has pointed out before, and right size now in projects going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do have a question. My question's around the overspend from HR. So HR is currently carrying a lot of vacancies. So I'm surprised at the overspend. And so I think the reason was given that there was additional agency costs and consulting fees. Can we have a breakdown of these, please? Come to the committee. Don't need an answer now, but if that can come to the committee, please, at a later date. Okay. And Adam, I think you're next.
It's a general question on the budgeting process. I'm not quite clear who sets the budget and who is responsible for it and who is meant to make sure that they keep within the budget and what checks are there on them. It's a general question about the budgeting process.
I think, Chair, that's really a question that is for Finance Committee, because that's where the budget process sits. But what I will say to answer the member's question is that if he wants a session to go through the budgeting process, I'm sure Sonia and team will be very happy to take you through that. The main committee that governs it is Finance Committee, who set the envelope. Policy and Resources do the resource allocation, and it's Court that actually determines the budget and sets it in March each year for all our funds, Cities Estate and City Bridge Foundation.
Thank you for that. As the representative of the Finance Committee on this committee, this is why I'm asking the question, I think. And we have been promised indeed briefing on these matters, but as yet we haven't had them.
I am surprised to hear that, but we will do separate briefings if you wish it. Certainly Finance Committee members and new members to the committee did have a briefing. I know because I was there, but Sonia.
Yes, Chair, if I can take that one. Yes, the separate meetings are being scheduled in. We're just looking at the diaries, working with the EAs and putting those in. But Sandra and Adam, we have taken those comments on board and we will be putting separate meetings. But the Chamberlain is absolutely right. The regional member briefings did take place. We are putting in additional meetings in place going forward.
I did attend those meetings and I'm still asking the questions.
I think you've heard Sonia offer that meeting to you.
Okay, thank you. Town Clerk, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just on page 37, Mark, just under the summary, there's a para that I've seen. I think it's probably the wrong way round. Just double check that for accuracy. So it refers to the overall net expenditure and the overspend. And I think we've transposed budget for outturn.
Yes. Yeah, quite right.
Thank you. Thank you. Town Clerk.
Thank you. That brings us on to item number 7, which is questions on matters related to the work of the committee. Been given no questions in advance. Seeing none in the room, that brings us on to item number 8, which is any other business that the chair considers urgent. There is one additional item of business on which I'm aware the chair wanted to provide the committee with an update on. Chair.
Thank you. So members, you will recall at the last meeting that I indicated my intention to hold a Corporate Services Committee Strategy Day. I'm now in the position to be able to confirm that a full day informal meeting of the Corporate Services Committee will be held on Wednesday, the 7th of January 2026, with this allowing time necessary to be dedicated to strategic planning and establishing a shared direction for the committee's future work. So this session will offer an opportunity to reflect on our current approach, identify priorities, and shape our collective vision moving forward. All attendees will be encouraged to contribute ideas, ask questions, and engage in an open and collaborative discussions. Further information regarding the detailed timings, venue, and an agenda will follow in due course. In the meantime, the Town Clerk will issue with a calendar invitation as a placeholder for the day in your diary.
Good day.
7th of January.
Thank you. That brings us on to item number 9, which is the exclusion of the public. That is for members to agree to exclusion of the public. Thank you. I'll ask my colleague to end the live stream and I'll confirm once we have moved into non-public session. I can confirm that we are now in non-public session.